I met Rachel in college, and from the moment I laid eyes on her, I was smitten. She had this infectious laugh, a way of making everyone around her feel seen, feel important. I was more reserved, analytical, an engineer by both nature and trade. Rachel, on the other hand, was a free spirit, an artist who saw beauty in chaos. Somehow, we balanced each other. I grounded her. She pushed me to embrace spontaneity. Our marriage was what people called perfect. At least, that's how it appeared from the outside. We had the house in the suburbs, 2 kids, thriving careers. I worked long hours, but I made time for my family. Rachel painted, ran a small art studio, and managed to be an incredible mother at the same time. I adored her, and I thought she felt the same. Even after 15 years, I still looked at Rachel the way I had when we first met. She was beautiful, even more so than in college. Time had added a depth to her, an elegance. I still reached for her in the mornings, kissed her before work, left notes on the fridge just to remind her I loved her. I never stopped loving her. We had our problems, of course. Every couple does. Rachel had always been more adventurous, more impulsive. She would go on these week-long trips with her art friends, and I never questioned it. I trusted her. That trust was the foundation of everything. Looking back, maybe I should have questioned things more. Maybe I should have noticed the small changes, the way she dressed up more often, how she suddenly became glued to her phone, the late nights at the studio. But I had no reason to suspect anything. Not yet. Life had a rhythm, and for the most part, I thought ours was steady. Sure, Rachel had been more distant lately, but I chalked it up to her art. She had always been passionate about her work, sometimes losing herself in it for days at a time. That was one of the things I loved about her, the way she poured herself into everything she did. But things started to shift in ways I couldn't ignore. It began with the phone. Rachel had never been secretive about it before. She used to leave it lying around the house, sometimes forgetting where she'd put it. Now, it was always in her hand or face down on the table. At first, I told myself she was just being more careful, maybe avoiding distractions. But then I noticed the notifications, the way her screen would light up, and she'd quickly swipe them away before I could glance over. Then there were the nights out. Rachel had always enjoyed going out with friends, but lately, she had been spending more and more evenings away from home. Just catching up with the girls, she'd say with a smile. I wanted to believe her. After all, she had never given me a reason not to. But one night, as I sat in our quiet living room, watching the clock tick past midnight, I felt it for the first time. That gnawing doubt, the whisper of something being off. She had texted earlier, saying she'd be late, but now she wasn't answering my calls. My mind went to 1,000 places, and none of them good. The next morning, she came home acting like nothing was wrong. I asked her if everything was okay, and she smiled, kissed me on the cheek, and told me not to worry so much. But I was worried. The cracks in our perfect life were starting to show, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore them, they were only getting bigger. The weeks that followed were filled with little moments that should have meant nothing but added up to something I couldn't ignore. Rachel was home less and less, and even when she was, it felt like she wasn't really there. She was distracted, lost in thought, her responses to me growing shorter, more absent-minded. I would talk about my day, about the kids, about anything really, and she would nod along, but I could tell she wasn't listening. The intimacy between us started to fade too. She used to reach for me at night, curl up against me in her sleep. But now she turned away. When I kissed her, she kissed back, but it felt like a formality. Something automatic. I kept telling myself it was just a phase. Maybe she was stressed. Maybe she was just going through something she wasn't ready to talk about. But deep down, I knew better. One evening, I decided to surprise her. She had mentioned a gallery opening downtown, an event she'd been excited about for weeks. I thought maybe showing up unannounced, supporting her like I always had, would remind her that we were still us. But when I got there, Rachel was nowhere to be found. I checked inside, asked around, even called her. No answer. When she finally texted back an hour later, She told me she had decided not to go after all, said she was exhausted and had come home early. Except when I got home, the house was empty. I sat in the dark, waiting. My mind raced with possibilities, with things I didn't want to believe. When Rachel finally walked through the door past midnight, she barely looked at me. She kissed my cheek, said she had been at a friend's place, and went straight to bed. For the first time in our marriage, I felt something I had never felt before. I didn't trust her. And that terrified me. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine. The doubts, the inconsistencies, the way Rachel had pulled away, it was all too much to ignore. One night, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided to confront her. We were sitting in the living room, the dim light casting shadows across her face. She looked beautiful as ever, but there was something distant in her eyes, like she was already somewhere else. Rachel, I started carefully. I feel like something's wrong. Like you've been different. She tensed slightly but didn't look surprised. What do you mean? She asked, keeping her tone light. You've been distant. Secretive. You're out late, and when you are home, it feels like you're not really here anymore. I took a breath. If something's going on, just tell me. She was silent for a long moment, her fingers gripping the edge of the couch. Then she let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing as if she had been waiting for this conversation. There is something, she admitted. My stomach dropped. I wasn't ready. I thought I wanted the truth, but now I wasn't so sure. I've been thinking a lot about us, she continued. About our marriage. And I love you, I really do, but I feel like something's missing. Missing? I repeated, my voice hollow. She hesitated before speaking again. I think we should try an open marriage. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I blinked, certain I had misheard her. An open marriage? She nodded. I just think we've been together so long, and maybe we need to explore other experiences. It doesn't mean I don't love you, I do, but I think this could bring us closer. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. For her to laugh and tell me this was some kind of twisted joke. But she wasn't joking. She was looking at me with hopeful eyes, like she expected me to agree. Anger, hurt, disbelief, all of it rushed through me at once. Rachel, no. Absolutely not. She sighed, as if she had expected my answer but had hoped otherwise. I don't want to lose what we have, she said, reaching for my hand. But I also don't want to ignore what I feel. I pulled away. And what is it that you feel, Rachel? My voice was sharper than I intended. She didn't answer right away. That silence told me everything. It wasn't just an idea to explore, she was already in too deep. There was someone else. I stood up, my mind racing. You've already been with someone, haven't you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to answer. I walked away before I could say something I'd regret. But deep down, I knew the truth. And worse, I knew what was coming next. Rachel wasn't going to wait for my approval. She was going to do it anyway. And she was going to do it right here in our home. The days that followed our conversation felt like a slow-motion car crash, one where I saw the impact coming but couldn't do a damn thing to stop it. Rachel didn't bring up the open marriage again, and neither did I. But the damage was done. The air between us had changed, thick with unspoken words and attention so sharp I could feel it in my bones. I knew she wasn't going to stop. The way she carried herself, the way she smiled at her phone, the way she suddenly had more late nights at the studio. It was all leading to one inevitable outcome. And then it happened. I had taken the kids to my parents' house for the weekend. Rachel claimed she had too much work to catch up on and couldn't join us. I wanted to believe her, but the moment I left, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So I did something I never thought I'd have to do. I checked the security cameras. We had them installed a couple of years ago, mostly for security and to keep an eye on package deliveries when we weren't home. They weren't hidden, Rachel knew they were there. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe she didn't care. Sitting in my parents' guest room, I pulled up the live feed on my phone. And there she was. Rachel. With him. A man I had never seen before, walking into my house like he belonged there. I watched in frozen horror as she greeted him at the door, wrapping her arms around his neck, kissing him like she had never kissed me. My stomach turned to stone. I told myself to stop watching, to turn it off before I saw anything else. But I couldn't. I watched as they laughed, as they drank wine in the same living room where we had spent years building a life together. I watched as she led him upstairs, our bedroom, our bed. And then I finally turned it off. I sat there in silence, the betrayal sinking in like a knife twisting deeper with every second. This wasn't just infidelity. This was our home. The place where we raised our children. The place where I had loved her unconditionally. And she had defiled it without a second thought. I clenched my fists, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The man in me wanted to storm back home, to rip them apart, to make him regret ever stepping foot into my house. But the rational part of me, the part that still had a shred of control, told me to wait. Because this wasn't over. Rachel thought she had won, that she had gotten away with it. But she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my parents' guest bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the images in my head like a horror film I couldn't turn off. Rachel, laughing with him. Rachel, taking him into our home. Rachel, betraying me in the very place we had built our lives. I clenched my fists until my nails dug into my palms. I had always thought, if this ever happened to me, I'd be the guy who exploded in rage, who drove home that second and tore the whole damn house apart. But I didn't. I just lay there, cold and empty, my mind working through every possible outcome. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to break down and ask her why. I was going to take everything from her, just like she had taken everything from me. I returned home Sunday night, acting as if nothing had changed. Rachel was already there, sitting on the couch with a book in her lap, looking up at me with a warm smile. "Hey, babe," she said casually, like she hadn't just torn our marriage apart. "How was your parents' place?" I forced a smile. "Good. Kids had fun." She nodded, stretching her arms over her head, the very picture of a woman with no guilt, no shame. I wondered how long she had been planning this, how many nights she had spent with him, while I was home, oblivious. I wanted to hate her. But I wasn't going to let emotion rule me. Not yet. "I miss you," she murmured, standing up and walking toward me, wrapping her arms around my neck. I almost recoiled, but I caught myself just in time. I played my part, wrapping my arms around her waist, inhaling the scent of her shampoo. It made me sick. "I miss you too," I lied. I felt her relax against me, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath my skin. Over the next few days, I continued to pretend. I kissed her good morning. I texted her throughout the day. I even made her favorite dinner one night, just to see if she had any guilt at all. She didn't. She laughed at my jokes. She lay in bed beside me at night, scrolling through her phone, probably messaging him. She thought she had won. She had no idea what was coming. I spent the next week gathering everything I needed. I combed through our bank statements, looking for anything suspicious. I checked our shared accounts, our investments, even the credit card charges. And there it was, hotel bookings, fancy dinners, little expenses that didn't fit our usual spending. She wasn't even trying to hide it. I started making copies of everything. Bank statements, mortgage papers, even the security footage from our home cameras. I made sure to save that in multiple places. I wasn't just planning to confront her. I was preparing for war. And then I went a step further. I reached out to a divorce attorney. Not just any attorney, the best one I could find. Someone who specialized in cases where infidelity played a role. I spent an afternoon in his office, laying everything out, making sure I knew exactly what I was entitled to, exactly how I could protect myself. The attorney was blunt. "You're in a good position," he told me. You have evidence, financial records, and the fact that she brought the affair into your home? Judges don't look kindly on that. If we play this right, you'll walk away with more than she ever expected." That was all I needed to hear. I wasn't going to yell at Rachel. I wasn't going to beg her to explain herself. I was going to let her dig her own grave. So I waited. I acted like the perfect husband, attentive, patient, even affectionate. I watched as Rachel grew more comfortable, more confident in her deception. She thought she had won. But what she didn't know was that every time she left the house, every time she stayed out late, every time she snuck around with him, I was documenting it. I was counting down the days. Because soon, very soon, she was going to learn exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The night before everything fell apart, I sat across from Rachel at the dinner table, watching her smile, watching her pretend. She had no idea that by the next morning, her entire world would come crashing down. I had everything in place. The lawyer had drafted the divorce papers, complete with all the financial evidence I had gathered. I had frozen our joint accounts earlier that day, ensuring she wouldn't be able to drain them before the paperwork hit. And most importantly, I had the footage, the undeniable proof of what she had done in our home. I barely slept that night. Not out of nerves, but out of anticipation. The next morning, I waited for Rachel to leave for one of her so-called art meetings. The moment she was out of the house, I put my plan into motion. First, I called her parents. I told them everything, sent them the proof, let them see with their own eyes what their daughter had done. They were shocked, disgusted even. Her mother cried, her father cursed under his breath. That was enough. I knew Rachel cared about her parents' opinion, and soon, they'd be confronting her themselves. Then I called my lawyer. He filed the divorce papers immediately. By the time Rachel returned home that afternoon, she had already been served. She walked through the front door, humming to herself, completely oblivious. When she saw me sitting at the kitchen table, a thick manila envelope in front of me, her smile faltered. "What's that?" she asked cautiously. I pushed the papers toward her. "Read." She hesitated, but when she finally flipped through the pages, her face went pale. "You're divorcing me?" I leaned back in my chair studying her. "What did you think was going to happen, Rachel?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. I didn't wait for her to respond. I reached for my phone and tapped the screen. The living room TV flickered on, and there it was, her, in our house, with him. The security footage played in absolute silence, except for the sound of her sharp inhale. She stumbled backward, her hand covering her mouth. You were spying on me?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Spying? No, Rachel. You were stupid enough to cheat on me in our own home, in front of cameras you knew existed." Her face twisted in panic. "Wait, we can talk about this." "No," I cut her off. "We're done talking. You can pack your things and get out, or you can wait for the sheriff to escort you out. Your choice." Tears welled in her eyes. "Please, let's—" I stood up, towering over her. "You didn't give me a choice when you decided to bring another man into our home, Rachel. Now I'm giving you a choice. But either way, you're leaving." Her shoulders shook, her face crumbling. But I felt nothing. No pity, no sadness. Just cold, satisfying certainty. I walked past her, heading for the door. "Oh, and one more thing," I said over my shoulder. "I froze the accounts. You won't be getting a dime more than what the court says you deserve. And trust me, you won't like the outcome." Then I walked out, leaving her standing there, shaking, knowing that she had lost everything. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Rachel didn't leave right away. She spent the next hour pacing, crying, and begging. First, she tried apologizing. Then she tried reasoning. And when neither of those worked, she turned to anger. "You're really going to throw away 15 years of marriage over one mistake?" she snapped, her face red and tear-streaked. I just laughed. "One mistake? Rachel, you've been sneaking around for months. Do you even know how many times you've lied to my face? How many nights you spent with him while I was home, clueless. She opened her mouth, but I didn't let her speak. You chose this, I said coldly. You asked for an open marriage, and when I said no, you went ahead and did it anyway. So don't stand there and act like I'm the one who ruined this. She wiped at her eyes, taking deep, shaky breaths. Where am I supposed to go? Not my problem. She flinched. I wasn't going to make this easier for her. Not after everything she had done. Eventually, she packed a bag and left. I watched from the window as she loaded it into her car and drove away, probably heading to his place. I didn't care. I didn't feel relief yet or peace. Just exhaustion. But I wasn't done yet. The next few days were a blur of legal meetings and financial moves. My lawyer made sure Rachel wouldn't be getting any more money than necessary. Since I had all the proof of her infidelity, it worked in my favor. She wouldn't be touching my savings, and I'd be keeping the house. She tried reaching out a few times, texts, voicemails, even an email with some long-winded apology about how she had lost herself. I deleted every single one without responding. She made her bed. She could lie in it. The kids took it hard. They were too young to understand the full details, but they knew something was wrong. I did my best to shield them from the worst of it, keeping their routines as normal as possible. But even they sensed Rachel's absence, and when they asked about her, I told them the truth, just enough for them to understand. She made some bad choices, I explained to them one night. And we can't be a family like we were before. They cried, and I held them, feeling the weight of it all. Rachel hadn't just betrayed me, she had betrayed them, too. That night, I sat alone in the house, staring at the empty spot where her car used to be. She was gone. And somehow, despite everything, I still didn't feel like I had won. Rachel didn't stay away for long. A week after she left, she showed up at the house. I was outside taking out the trash when I saw her car pull into the driveway. I could already feel the headache forming. She stepped out hesitantly, her face puffy from crying. Can we talk? No. I turned back toward the house, but she hurried after me. Please, just give me 5 minutes, she begged. I sighed, crossing my arms. Fine. 5 minutes. She let out a shaky breath. I wanted to say I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I need you to know that. I stared at her, waiting for the part where she tried to justify herself, but she didn't. She just stood there, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. I messed up, she whispered. And I lost everything because of it. I could see the regret in her eyes, but it didn't matter. It was too late. You didn't just mess up, Rachel. You destroyed us. My voice was calm, but the weight of the words landed like a hammer. You threw away our marriage, our family, for what? Some fling? Was it worth it? She didn't answer. She didn't have to. I didn't mean for it to go this far, she said finally. But it did, I said, stepping back toward the door. And now you have to live with it. Her lip trembled. I still love you, you know. I shook my head. No, Rachel. You love the idea of me. You love the security I gave you, the stability. But if you really loved me, you wouldn't have done what you did. Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't care. I was done carrying the weight of her choices. I turned to go inside. Don't come back unless it's about the kids or legal matters. She didn't fight me on it. She just stood there as I shut the door, leaving her on the other side, where she belonged. The divorce was finalized soon after. I kept the house. I kept my savings. And I moved forward. Rachel, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. Her relationship with him didn't last, big surprise there. Last I heard, she was staying in a cheap apartment across town, struggling to make ends meet. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt like I won. But all I felt was relief. Because I was finally free. In the months after the divorce, I learned something important. Healing isn't instant. It isn't some dramatic moment where everything suddenly feels okay. It's slow, messy, and unpredictable. Some nights, I slept peacefully, feeling lighter than I had in years. Other nights, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how Rachel could have done this to me. To us. But no matter how much I thought about it, the outcome remained the same. She was gone. The life I had built with her was over. And I was still here. I threw myself into being a father first and foremost. The kids were my anchor, the one thing that mattered more than anything else. I made sure they knew I was there for them, that I wasn't going anywhere. At first, they struggled. They missed their mother, even after what she had done. But over time, they adjusted. They grew stronger. We all did. Eventually, I started to reclaim my life. I redecorated the house, erasing every trace of Rachel's presence. I started working out more, getting into the best shape I had been in years. I reconnected with old friends, went on trips I had always put off. And slowly but surely, I started dating again. It was strange at first, stepping into a world I hadn't been part of in over a decade. But I took it slow, enjoying the freedom, the excitement of meeting new people. I wasn't looking for a replacement for Rachel. I was just looking for me. One night, months later, I got a text from Rachel. "Rachel, I saw a picture of you the other day. You look happy." I stared at the message for a long time. I could have ignored it. I could have responded with bitterness. But in the end, I only typed 2 words. Me, I am. And for the first time in a long time, it was the absolute truth. I was happy. I was free. And I was never looking back.